There have been an increasing number of high-profile breaches of journalistic ethics on both sides of the border in recent months. Brian Williams, George Stephanopoulos, Evan Solomon, Leslie Roberts, Peter Mansbridge, Amanda Lang. Joining us now to put media ethics under the microscope, here's Jesse Brown, journalist and media critic who runs the website and podcast Canadaland. And let me start by just saying welcome back to TVO. You used to do sort of Canadaland's predecessor podcast here.
I did Search Engine here, and I was on your program talking about the Margaret Wente case when it occurred to me that what I care about, what I want to start talking about is the media.
And you're the guy now.
I guess so.
So that's why we wanted to have you on.
One of them.
Is this a problem, in your view, with journalism or journalists?
Both. You know, we've seen a lot of problems, and you know, a lot of focus is on certain institutions. The CBC, something is very wrong there. So we're seeing a lot of cases there, but we're also seeing cases like the influence of ownership when it comes to Bell Media. Kevin Krull calling CTV and saying, I don't want to see my adversary, the chairman of the CRTC, on the air today because we were at loggerheads over some policy stuff.
That cost him his job.
Cost him his job. That story probably wouldn't have been reported a couple of years ago, but now it cost him his job. So I think we're also seeing stuff that is a ripple effect of the economic situation that the industry is in. So we're seeing, I think, problems that probably always existed getting exposed where they wouldn't before.
So far, most of the people we talk about are broadcasters. Is it a broadcast issue more so than a print or radio issue? I
think that the
magazines, I guess I should say, too.
The specifics, you know, you listed off all those names. Mm-hmm. That's a broadcast issue. We have this, you know, whether you call it toxic celebrity host culture, you know, this is something that has been allowed to gestate. And this was a very deliberate thing where, especially the CBC, under Richard Sturzberg, Kirsten Stewart, there was a decision made that we are going to groom these celebrity journalists. And a lot of money was put in to branding the CBC with their images, to putting up billboards with these people's faces, and putting them out there as the face of the organization. And that created power disparities in an organization where some people are on one-month contracts and other people are the brand. There are larger issues with this that are not about CBC's culture or their decisions. I think that what we're seeing is a fracturing in some of the, I guess, some of the conceits that broadcast journalism has been, you know, putting out there for the public. That a host, anchor, can be the voice of God, the brand of the news organization, the chief correspondent, is what Mansbridge's official title is, that they are not only reading the news, but they are the first and last word when it comes to the editorial policy of the organization.
Yeah, I know there's a temptation to say this is a CBC thing, but I think the fact, I mean, Leslie Roberts was an anchor for Global, private television. George Stephanopoulos gave money to the Clinton Foundation. Yeah. He's in private television. Brian Williams, well-known situation. He's in private television. You can't really say this is or can you, that this is a public television versus private television phenomenon. Doesn't seem to be.
No, and even when we talk about what is specific to the CBC, I don't think that that's a public television problem. That's a CBC problem. With all due respect to our other public TV personalities, I think there's different issues. You know, there's parts of this that I think just the role of the anchor is not what it was ever. I don't know if it ever was what it was supposed to be, but now, you know, we're seeing the strings there. And you know, there are aspects of this that are particular to Canada, where we become almost a Galapagos island of media ethics, where some of the stuff with Leslie Roberts, like, what was he thinking? I mean, it's sort of...
You want to remind everybody what he did?
Leslie Roberts was secretly moonlighting as the co-owner of a PR firm, and the clients of this PR firm were coming on to his broadcasts. I mean, you know, this is just something that you know, a person of his intelligence should have just understood right from the get-go.
So let's ask this question, because I'm sure you've explored this question on your Canadaland podcast. Do you have any greater insight today than you might have, say, a year ago, as to why somebody risks their good name, their good job, their good salary, to do some of these very bad things?
Do I have any more insight? I guess I have a bit of an... hubris and self-denial, I think, can never be...
dismissed.
And it's incredible what people can convince themselves is okay. And I think that is not something that is independent of a culture where there's no checks and balances, where nobody is holding them to account, and where people selectively disclose aspects of what they're up to and then convince themselves, you know, and I'm thinking specifically here of Evan Solomon, who did make certain disclosures to the CBC, but how he ended up going from you know, well, hey, everybody's got a right to have a business on the side, to saying to Jim Balsillie, hey, why don't you meet me and we'll talk on background about a story, calling him up as a CBC journalist, and then they meet for a drink and saying, oh, here's my friend the art dealer. I'm going to go use the washroom, you guys talk. And meanwhile, he's getting a 10% kickback of any sales that result. I mean, it's such a clear violation of any understanding of journalistic ethics that you have to wonder what, you know, a really smart guy like Evan Solomon was thinking. And I don't know, I can't understand that, but you know, you see this in all walks of life. I mean, you see, what did President Clinton get up to? People do very silly things. They spend their lives building their reputations and their careers, and then they act impulsively and do things that jeopardize
I think in Clinton's case, he said, you know, he's the President of the United States, and you can understand if a President of the United States thinks he can get away with anything, because he's the most powerful man in the world, so of course he thinks he can get away with anything. These are people who host television shows. You know, they're not the most powerful people in the world.
But think about this, Steve, and this is something that maybe you can appreciate. This is a country, English Canada specifically, we don't really have a lot of celebrities. We have some people who go down to the States and become celebrities, and then they're famous here, but they don't tend to live here. We have a very short list of people whose faces you recognize, and you're probably on that list in Toronto.
Mostly hockey players, I think, are on the list.
There
Seriously.
you go.
Yeah.
So, you know, even within the elite status of being a celebrity, in Canada, that's a super elite. There are very few people who have that, and I think that when you have somebody who is in that very rare club of being a Canadian celebrity, but they're a journalist, they're not making more than a paltry few $100,000 a year, and we don't know exactly what Evan Solomon was making, as we do your salary from the Sunshine List. That CBC doesn't disclose that information, unfortunately. But we know that it's nothing, you know, it's more than it would be more than enough for me and most Canadians. But when you are on that very short list, the value of that celebrity itself, you might start to believe, is worth more than what you're getting paid. And when you're rubbing shoulders with people who are in the political or financial elite of the country, I think maybe you start to wonder, well, why don't I have that grand Muskoka cottage as well?
So the next question becomes, can you tell whether this has actually damaged the trust that most journalists have with the public? Does the public think less of journalism and journalists today because of all this?
I would say yes, and I would also point out that we've always ranked low when the public has been asked, what do you think of these journalists? They don't think much of us.
Still ahead of politicians,
yes,
ahead of lawyers,
yeah,
you know, used car salespeople.
There is unquestionably a crisis of credibility, and that is what's fundamental. It is not about a few personalities flaming out. Whether or not people can trust the people whose job it is to inform them is very much in question. And the real victim, I mean, the Evan Solomon case, when you talk about Amanda Lang or these other, you know, people got hurt. And with Amanda Lang, she had a colleague, Kathy Tomlinson, whose story she tried to sabotage, in my view. Those are cases where I don't feel terribly bad for
I'm glad you said in my view.
In my view.
Because, you know, in the interests of, what do I say here? In the interest of
not getting sued?
Well, yep, that's not a bad motive, actually. Yeah, I mean, she would say she's the senior business correspondent for CBC Television. It would be a natural state of affairs for her to be brought in on a conference call that is looking at a business issue. Sure,
never happened before in that team's experience with CBC.
Maybe it should have.
Maybe it should have, but it seems specific that in that particular call, where the story involved a company that her partner was on the board of directors for, a company that she'd received money from, she inserted herself very aggressively in that story. So I don't feel bad for Amanda Lang for being exposed by Canada Land for what she got up to in that instance. It's hard to feel good about what happened with Evan Solomon. You know, this is a guy who I think did his job quite well, and I don't think that you can't really find a place where it impacted his journalism. Who it did hurt was his colleagues at the CBC, their credibility of a very damaged news brand. There are tons of people working there every day to try to recover from everything that's happened, and for whom the trust that they have with the public is their bread and butter. So, you know, people do get hurt when these things happen.
Let me ask you about this new campaign. Perhaps people have seen it in the newspapers, full-page ads, some well-known journalists whose faces are used in the ads. And the campaign is called Journalism Is. And they're saying such things as that journalism is essential to democracy, journalism is, you know, committed to the public interest, journalism is a watchdog over the powerful. Two questions here. First, in your view, journalism is what?
It is all those things. Those are the ideals of journalism. And I think that most people who get involved with it get involved because they believe in those ideals. There are places where you can make more money. So I think that that's great. That's fine to remind the public of those ideals. If we really want to restore people's faith in what we do, we need to do our jobs better.
Okay, so the second part of the question then becomes, if that's what journalism is, here's a campaign that ironically is, or maybe not ironically, coincidentally is being launched at a time when we're seeing lots of bad behavior in journalism. So is this in some respects thrown away money because there's one full-page ad talking about what journalism is compared to mountains and mountains and mountains of column inches on all of what journalism ought not to be that we're seeing at the same time?
Well, what's that quote? You have a PR problem because you have a real problem. You know, this isn't something that we need a new branding effort to resolve. This happened for a reason. Some of this stuff was always going on, and it was tolerated, and people lower down on the totem pole didn't say anything about it, A, because we didn't have any real viable outlet for media criticism in this country, but also because those people had jobs to lose as well. It's no accident that while we're seeing, at the moment where these news organizations are imploding, people are getting laid off and everyone's job security is in question, and then you see somebody at the top dipping in on the side or doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, that's when I get an email, right? That's when people's loyalty to their news organizations is in question. They say, why am I losing my job when this person is doing this and compromising the brand for everybody? So when we see that kind of profligate waste of money, those things only exacerbate the problem, because we have some serious problems in this industry just to make it a viable, you know, to do our jobs and inform people.
Having said that, I'm a little leery about giving the impression that, first of all, this is completely widespread. I don't think it is, this kind of bad behavior. And second of all, I'm a little older than you. I'm a lot older than you. And I do remember the days when, you know, politicians used to have their speeches written by journalists. Or journalists would go on TV, you know, as they were throwing to another item and advertise a product. I mean, we don't do those things anymore. So can you say actually things are better today than they were, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago?
Well, I think they're better and they're worse. I mean, I think that I throw out products at the beginning of my podcast every episode.
Yes, you do.
I think that there's you know, an issue of transparency, you know, that we're placing a greater emphasis on. And you know, I think it's really hard to tell. Back when there were only, you know, 3 networks, and if there was almost a thin blue line, or maybe it's a thin black line, and you know, you don't say anything about people in the business, or you'll be blacklisted from the business. Now that we're having proliferation of, you know, anybody can say anything on Twitter, Facebook, or you can start a small media company like I did, and it's harder to suppress that kind of information. So certainly, you know, the technological reality, the financial reality, as I you know, just explained, that is bringing out things that were always there.
So what do you think could bring journalism back into the public's greater esteem right now?
Better journalism, a return to first principles. And there is an opportunity here. I mean, this is a golden age for journalism. For all of these ethical you know, scandals, this is a golden age. I can read things now from all over the world. I read more newspapers, magazines. It's harder to suppress information than it ever was before. Stuff gets out, and everybody has the capability on their smartphone that a full news team with satellite capabilities had in the past. Everybody can do that now. So the question for us is, where does that leave, you know, professional journalists? What are we supposed to do in this age of, you know, the amateur journalist, or whatever you want to call it? And far from making us obsolete, I think it has freed us from the burden of doing press release journalism, of doing scrum journalism, of doing, you know, these pre-staged events, even a lot of lifestyle journalism. You know, there's going to be a blog out there that's going to highlight this year's fashions, and somebody's going to do it for free, or they're going to do it, you know, like, we can get back to what we're supposed to do, which is, who's going to actually show up in the courtroom and diligently report everything that's going on? Who's going to go through thousands of pages of government procurements? Who's going to take all of that information that's flooding in from tipsters, people with smartphones, people with, you know, and actually verify it, go through it, you know, source it, get the other side of the story? That is sort of, you know, drawing into sharper focus than ever what we should have always been doing.
The biggest, our last minute here, Brian Williams' story's got to be the biggest fall from grace. This is a guy making $10 million a year as the NBC nightly news anchor. Clearly made up a whole lot of stuff about his past. Not sure completely why yet. He's gone to the penalty box, but now he's coming back. Not to his old job, but he's got a job on network television in the United States. I mean, that's not a bad second choice. Does this suggest to you that Leslie Roberts or Evan Solomon could come back, go to the penalty box for a while, could come back, do journalism again? My personal opinion, Evan Solomon, yes. Leslie Roberts, no. If I'm just handicapping the outcomes here, anything could happen, I suppose. And you know, I think that I hope that people make mistakes, and I think that you know, if people own up for them completely, I don't think anybody deserves to be cut off from making a living, whether it's in this field or somewhere else. But your credibility, your reputation is
That's your currency, you know, and you only got one reputation. You can have dozens of different jobs. You can work for different broadcasters. God knows, as a freelance journalist, I've worked for
all of them.
all of them. Yeah. I've been in and out of the door, but you got one reputation.
You're the guy whose job it is to keep an eye on the journalists. How careful do you have to be right now?
Oh, you know, there's a lot of people gunning for me.
There sure are.
Just out of self-preservation, I have to be very careful. And I am as, like, I'm not on some white horse of virtue. If I was in these situations, I have no doubt that I could have found myself in a compromised situation, you know, and it's only by virtue of the fact that the industry is in the state that it's in, and I got into it at a point where having contract after contract as opposed to being kind of like a staff member, you know, it was less viable. So I had this idea for media criticism. I couldn't sell it anywhere, and I did it myself, right? If I was in one of those shops, you start to kind of absorb the values and what's tolerated and what you can get away with. All of that happens, you know, when you're in an organization like that. Now I have the opportunity to start my own organization, and you know, I tell the people who you know, I've hired, like, you write about me, scrutinize me. I have a disclosure page. I don't do this because I do this because if I don't catch myself, somebody else is going to catch me. And
I guess in the interest of full disclosure, I should say I listen, I like, and I support what you do.
So come on the show.
You've never invited me.
I'm sure I did.
You did?
I did.
Oh, well, let's revisit this. I don't remember that.
The offer still stands.
Okay, Jesse. Well, thank you for coming on this program anyway.
Thank you, and thank you for supporting Canada.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.